They say the measure of a person's character isn't found in their moments of comfort, but in how they treat those who can do nothing for them. My name is Margaret Chen, and last Christmas, I discovered exactly what my daughter thought of me when she handed me car keys instead of a house key. The temperature outside was 17 degrees. The car heater barely worked. And through the frosted windows, I could see my own family laughing around a dinner table where apparently there was no room for me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning I realized my daughter Victoria considered me more of an inconvenience than a mother wasn't when she forgot to call on my birthday. It wasn't when she started introducing me to her friends as my birth mother Margaret, as if I were some distant relative she'd recently discovered through a DNA test. It was the moment she pressed those car keys into my palm on Christmas Eve and said, "The guest rooms are all taken, but the SUV has heated seats. You'll be perfectly comfortable." Her husband Nathan stood behind her, nodding as if this were the most reasonable suggestion in the world. As if asking a 65-year-old woman to sleep in a vehicle during the coldest night of the year was simply a minor scheduling conflict. I stared at those keys, their metal edges cold against my skin, and something inside me that had bent for 35 years finally snapped. Not dramatically, not with tears or shouting, but with a clarity so sharp it felt like stepping out of a fog I hadn't even realized I'd been walking through. If I wasn't worthy of a bed in my daughter's 5-bedroom house, then perhaps it was time to reevaluate exactly what I was worthy of. The phone call I would make 3 hours later would change everything. But to understand why one phone call could flip our entire world upside down, you need to understand how a devoted mother became someone her daughter felt comfortable relegating to the garage. I never planned to be a single mother. When I married James Chen at 23, we had dreams of building a life together in Seattle, raising a family, growing old on the same porch where we'd drink coffee and watch our grandchildren play. James was a structural engineer with gentle hands and a laugh that could fill a room. I was a paralegal at a small firm downtown, good with details, better with people. We saved every penny for 2 years before buying our first home, a modest 2-bedroom in Ballard with a leaky roof and endless potential. Victoria arrived on a rainy Tuesday in April, 3 weeks early and perfect in every way. James cried when he held her for the first time, whispering promises in Mandarin that his mother had whispered to him. I watched them together and thought, my heart might explode from happiness. For 3 beautiful years, we were the family we'd dreamed of being. James would come home from work and sweep Victoria into elaborate games of pretend. I'd find them building blanket forts in the living room or having serious conversations with her stuffed animals about structural integrity. Then came the phone. Call that shattered everything. A construction site accident. A beam that wasn't properly secured. James was gone before the ambulance even arrived. I was 27 years old with a 3-year-old daughter, a mortgage, and a grief so heavy I could barely breathe. The life insurance covered the funeral and a few months of expenses. The settlement from the construction company took 2 years to materialize and barely covered our debts. Everyone had advice. Move back home with your parents, they said. Find a new husband quickly, they urged. Give yourself time to grieve, some counseled. But I had a daughter who asked for daddy every night and bills that didn't care about my broken heart. I threw myself into survival mode. The paralegal job wasn't enough, so I went back to school at night, earning my court reporting certification while Victoria slept at the neighbor's house. Mrs. Patterson was a godsend, a retired teacher who refused payment but accepted my homemade lasagnas and endless gratitude. By day, I worked at the law firm. By night, I studied. On weekends, I picked up freelance transcription work. Every dollar went toward keeping our house, keeping Victoria in decent clothes, keeping up the pretense that we were doing fine. I became an expert at creative frugality. Garage sales became treasure hunts. Generic brands became our norm. I learned to cut Victoria's hair myself, to mend clothes instead of replacing them, to make birthday cakes that looked store-bought with tricks learned from library books. When Victoria complained that her classmates had nicer things, I'd remind her that we had each other, and that was worth more than any toy. She'd roll her eyes, but she'd also climb into my lap for our nightly reading ritual, and I'd think we were going to be okay. Middle school changed everything. Victoria discovered that poverty wasn't picturesque, and having a mother who worked constantly wasn't admirable. It was embarrassing. She started lying about where we lived, making excuses for why friends couldn't come over. I'd find tags from expensive stores hidden in her backpack, items she'd shoplifted because she was tired of wearing discount clothes. The lectures, the tears, the promises to do better, it all became an exhausting cycle. When Victoria was 16, she met Nathan, Morrison Black, at a summer debate camp I'd saved for all year. Nathan came from old Seattle money, the kind of family whose name was on hospital wings and museum galleries. He was polite enough to me, but I could see the careful assessment in his eyes when he picked Victoria up for dates. The way he noted our modest neighborhood, my older car, the carefully maintained but obviously dated interior of our home. Victoria saw it too, and I watched her start to view our life through his lens. She began spending more time at Nathan's family estate in Medina, coming home with stories about their art collection and household staff. She started peppering her speech with phrases like, "people like us," and "a certain standard," always careful to position herself on Nathan's side of those invisible lines. When she got into University of Washington, I was thrilled. When she chose to live in the dorms despite my offer to let her stay home and save money, I understood. She was establishing distance, creating a new identity where Margaret Chen, the overworked single mother, was a footnote rather than a main character. I paid what I could toward her tuition, taking on extra court reporting jobs for evening depositions and weekend arbitrations. My hands developed chronic pain from the repetitive motion, but I invested in better equipment and kept going. When Victoria joined Nathan's sorority, yes, his family had influence there too, I scraped together the dues. When she needed professional clothing for internships at firms where Nathan's father had connections, I haunted high-end consignment shops and learned to spot quality pieces that would pass muster. The engagement came during her senior year. Nathan proposed at his family's holiday party, an elaborate affair I learned about secondhand from Victoria's breathless phone call. The ring was a family heirloom, naturally. The wedding would be at the Morrison Black estate, of course. And could I please not mention to anyone that I'd been a paralegal? Perhaps we could say I worked in legal services? It sounded more appropriate. I wish I could say I pushed back, that I demanded the respect I deserved. But the truth was, I was so grateful to still be included in Victoria's life that I accepted whatever crumbs she offered. I smiled through the engagement party where I was introduced as Victoria's mother, while Nathan's parents were Mr. and Mrs. Morrison Black. I nodded when the wedding planner suggested I might be more comfortable at the back of the ceremony to avoid the photographers. I even agreed when Victoria asked me not to give a toast at the reception because Nathan's father has some important business associates attending, and we need to keep things flowing smoothly. After the wedding, the distance became a chasm. Victoria and Nathan bought a house in Bellevue with help from his trust fund. I was invited over exactly twice in the first year, both times when Nathan was traveling. Victoria would spend the visits pointing out all the upgrades they were making, using words like elevation and market position that sounded hollow coming from the daughter I'd raised on library books and love. She developed a habit of calling me Margaret instead of Mom when others were around, as if our relationship were a professional arrangement rather than flesh and blood. The Christmas incident started small. The first year, I was disinvited from the Morrison Black family Christmas Eve because it's really just for immediate family. I spent the evening alone, watching It's a Wonderful Life, and trying not to wonder when I'd stopped qualifying as immediate family. The second year, I was allowed to come for Christmas dinner, but asked to park on the street rather than in the driveway because they were expecting important guests. The third year, Victoria forgot to tell me dinner had been moved up 2 hours, and I arrived to find everyone already finished with dessert. Last year was when things escalated. Victoria called 2 days before Christmas to inform me that Nathan's sister and her family would be staying with them, so they wouldn't have room for overnight guests. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Would I mind getting a hotel room? She'd already found a lovely, modest place about 40 minutes away. When I suggested I could sleep on the couch, she laughed as if I'd suggested camping in the yard. "Oh, Margaret," she said, using that tone, "I'd come to despise. Nathan's family would find that so odd. Let's not make anyone uncomfortable." I spent Christmas Eve in a Motel 6, eating Chinese takeout and watching snow fall on the parking lot. The next morning, I arrived at Victoria's house to find cars lined up around the circular driveway like a luxury dealership. Inside, Nathan's extended family filled every room, their cashmere sweaters and subtle jewelry making my carefully chosen outfit look exactly what it was, trying too hard. Victoria barely acknowledged my arrival, too busy playing hostess to people who looked through me as if I were part of the catering staff. The moment that stays with me from that Christmas was when Nathan's aunt asked Victoria about her background. "Oh, I was raised here in Seattle," Victoria said smoothly. "Pretty typical upbringing." She glanced at me, a quick warning in her eyes, and I understood I was meant to smile and say nothing. Pretty typical. As if the nights I'd stayed up transcribing court records to pay for her school clothes were typical. As if the years of sacrifice and struggle were just average parenting. I excused myself to the bathroom and spent 10 minutes looking at my reflection, wondering when I'd become someone so easy to erase. This year, I'd promised myself things would be different. I'd been seeing a therapist, Dr. Elaine Summers, who'd been helping me understand the patterns of enabling and dismissal that had developed between Victoria and me. "You've taught her that your needs don't matter," Dr. Summers said during one session. "Every time you accept less than basic respect, you reinforce that message." She was right, of course. But knowing something intellectually and changing patterns built over decades were very different things. Still, I'd made progress. I'd joined a book club at the library, started taking morning walks with a group of women from the community center. I'd even gone on a few coffee dates with Harold Kim, a retired accountant who made me laugh and never once made me feel like I needed to apologize for who I was. I was building a life that didn't revolve entirely around waiting for Victoria to need something from me, which is why the text message 3 days before Christmas felt like such a betrayal. "Hi, Margaret. Slight change of plans for Christmas. Nathan's business partner from Hong Kong is arriving with his family. We'll need all the guest rooms, but don't worry, you can still join us. The car will be perfectly comfortable for one night. The SUV has those amazing captain chairs that fully recline, like a hotel on wheels. See you Christmas Eve." I read the message 4 times, certain I was misunderstanding. She couldn't possibly be suggesting I sleep in a car, in December, in Seattle. While Nathan's business partner's family enjoyed the guest rooms in the house, I'd helped her feel confident enough to live in. But the follow-up text made it crystal clear. "I've already put fresh blankets in the car and made sure the heater works. You'll be toasty warm." Toasty warm. In a car. On Christmas Eve. While my daughter and her husband entertained guests in Tizier, their 5-bedroom house with 3 bathrooms and a finished basement apartment. I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd helped Victoria with homework and college applications, and felt something shift inside me. It wasn't anger. Exactly. It was clarity. Cold, sharp clarity about exactly where I stood in my daughter's life. I was an obligation to be managed, an embarrassment to be minimized, a problem to be solved with whatever solution required the least disruption to her carefully curated life. But what Victoria didn't know, what she'd never bothered to learn, about her mother beyond the broad strokes of working-class struggle, was that Margaret Chen had developed some connections of her own over the years. Specifically, she didn't know about my relationship with Judge Patricia Kwan, whose family proceedings I'd been transcribing for 15 years. She didn't know that Judge Kwan's husband, Robert, was the managing partner at Morrison Black & Associates, the law firm that bore Nathan's family name but had long since passed out of their direct control. And she certainly didn't know that I'd been doing private transcription work for Robert Kwan for the past 5 years, or that he'd become something of a mentor to me. As I stared at that text message, a plan began forming in my mind. Victoria. Thought she could treat me like an inconvenience to be stored in the garage until needed. She thought 35 years of sacrifice and love could be repaid with car keys and fresh blankets. She thought Margaret Chen was someone without options, without dignity, without recourse. She was about to learn exactly how wrong she was. The phone call I would make on Christmas Eve wouldn't just change our family dynamic. It would flip the entire Morrison Black family hierarchy on its head. Because while Victoria had been so busy cultivating her new identity and maintaining her social position, she'd forgotten one crucial thing. The woman who'd raised her alone, who'd worked multiple jobs while earning certifications, who'd navigated the legal world for decades, wasn't just some embarrassing working-class mother to be hidden away. I was a survivor, a fighter. And I was done being treated as anything less than what I deserved. The drive to Victoria's house on Christmas Eve took longer than usual, not because of traffic, but because I kept pulling over to practice what I would say. Each time, the words felt inadequate against 35 years of history. How do you explain to your daughter that love shouldn't come with conditions? That respect isn't something you graduate out of deserving? By the time I reached Bellevue, the snow had started falling in thick, lazy flakes that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. Victoria's house blazed with light, every window glowing warm against the darkening sky. Cars already lined the driveway, expensive ones with dealer plates and custom paint jobs. Through the tall windows, I could see figures moving, holding wine glasses, throwing their heads back in laughter. It looked like a scene from a holiday commercial, the kind that sells luxury cars or investment portfolios. Perfect, polished, and completely artificial. I parked on the street as instructed, though there was plenty of room in the driveway. Heaven forbid the neighbors see my 8-year-old Honda among the Mercedes and Teslas. As I walked up the carefully salted walkway, the front door opened and Victoria appeared, backlit like an actress making an entrance. She wore a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, her hair styled in waves that looked effortless but weren't. "Margaret," she said, glancing past me as if checking whether any of the neighbors were watching. "You're early." "It's 6:30, I said. "You told me to come at 6:30. She waved a manicured hand dismissively. "Did I? Well, we're not quite ready for dinner yet. The Chang's flight was delayed, so everything's been pushed back." She stepped aside just enough to let me squeeze past. "Why don't you wait in the kitchen? Sandra could probably use some help." Sandra was their housekeeper, a dignified woman from El Salvador who'd been cleaning houses longer than Victoria had been alive. The suggestion that I help the hired help wasn't lost on me, but I held my tongue. The kitchen was a monument to excess: marble countertops, commercial-grade appliances, and enough copper cookware to outfit a restaurant. Sandra looked up from arranging canapes and gave me a knowing smile. "Mrs. Chen," she said warmly. "Merry Christmas." "Merry Christmas, Sandra, and please call me Margaret." We worked in companionable silence for a few minutes before Sandra spoke again. "She doesn't mean to be cruel," she said quietly. "She just forgets where she came from." "Does she?" I asked, arranging crackers on a sterling silver tray I recognized from Nathan's family collection. "Sometimes I think she remembers exactly where she came from. That's why she works so hard to pretend it never happened." Sandra touched my arm gently. "You did good raising her alone. My mama, she raised 5 of us by herself. I know how hard it is." Before I could respond, Nathan breezed into the kitchen, already several drinks into his evening, judging by the flush on his cheeks. "Margaret," he said with false joviality. "Glad you could make it. Did Vic show you where you'll be staying tonight?" "She mentioned the car," I said evenly. He laughed as if I'd made a particularly clever joke. Right, the car. Don't worry, it's the Escalade. Plenty of room, climate control, better than some hotels I've stayed in." He grabbed a handful of nuts from a bowl Sandra had just filled. "Besides, it's just for one night. The Changs are very particular about their accommodations. You understand?" "I understand perfectly," I said, and I did. I understood that Nathan had never spent a night in his car in his life. I understood that he couldn't fathom what he was asking of me because he'd never had to consider such indignities. I understood that in his world, comfort was a birthright, and inconvenience was something that happened to other people. The evening progressed exactly as I'd expected. I was introduced to the other guests with vague descriptions that carefully omitted any real information about me. "This is Margaret, Victoria's mother." Period. No mention of my work, my interests, my existence beyond biological function. The Changs turned out to be a younger couple from Hong Kong, with twin toddlers who spent the evening destroying Victoria's carefully arranged living room, while their parents discussed market fluctuations with Nathan. During dinner, I was seated at the far end of the table, between Sandra's teenage daughter, who'd been pressed into serving duty, and Nathan's ancient great-aunt, who spent the meal complaining about her digestive issues. Victoria held court at the other end, playing the perfect hostess, occasionally shooting me warning glances when I looked like I might contribute to the conversation happening just out of reach. The moment that crystallized everything came during dessert. Nathan's mother, a bird-like woman with sharp eyes and sharper tongue, was regaling the table with a story about their recent charity gala. "Of course," she said, "we only invite a certain caliber of people. It's important to maintain standards. Otherwise, these events just become free-for-alls for anyone looking for a handout." Several guests murmured agreement. Victoria laughed. That tinkling artificial sound she'd perfected since marrying Nathan. "So true, Mother Morrison. There's nothing worse than people who don't understand their place." She didn't look at me when she said it, but she didn't have to. Message received. I excused myself, claiming I needed air, and stepped onto the back deck. The snow was falling harder now, accumulating on the patio furniture in soft drifts. Inside, the party continued, warm and bright and completely indifferent to my absence. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I needed. Robert Kwan answered on the second ring, despite the late hour. "Margaret, is everything all right?" "Robert," I said, watching my breath cloud in the cold air. "I'm sorry to call on Christmas Eve, but I need to ask about that offer you made last month." There was a pause. "The position at the firm?" "Yes." Inside, someone had started playing piano, badly. "Is it still available?" "Of course, it is. I told you. We'd create the position specifically for you. Senior paralegal with a focus on family law transcription and case management. Are you finally ready to accept?" I'd turned Robert down 3 times over the past year, each time because accepting felt like admitting I'd outgrown my current life. Now, standing on my daughter's deck, excluded from her party and expected to sleep in her garage, I realized I'd been clinging to something that had disappeared years ago. "There's a complication," I said. "The position would involve working with Morrison, Black & Associates, correct?" "Naturally. We handle all their overflow work. Why? Is that a problem?" "My son-in-law is Nathan Morrison Black." Robert was quiet for a long moment. "I see. Well, that is interesting. Nathan's been trying to get more involved with the firm since his father stepped back. Been pushing for changes that would benefit his personal investments rather than the firm's clients." Another pause. "This might actually work to our advantage." Having someone with inside knowledge of the family dynamics could be very valuable. I'm not looking for revenge, I said quickly. Of course not. You're looking for respect, professional advancement, recognition of your skills and experience. The fact that it might complicate Nathan's ambitions is merely coincidental. Through the windows, I could see Victoria laughing at something one of the guests had said. She looked happy, complete, as if nothing and no one were missing from her perfect evening. When would I start? I asked. How does January 2nd sound? We'll need you to handle the Montgomery divorce proceedings. Ugly situation. The husband's been hiding assets offshore, and the wife's attorney is Patricia's daughter. You know how Patricia feels about financial manipulation in family law cases. I did know. Judge Patricia Kwan had built her reputation on ensuring equitable divisions of assets, particularly in cases where one spouse had used financial manipulation to control the other. She had no patience for hidden accounts, shell companies, or any of the dozen tricks wealthy spouses used to avoid their obligations. January 2nd works perfectly, I said. Excellent. Oh, and Margaret? The position comes with a signing bonus, enough to cover first and last month's rent on one of those nice apartments near the courthouse. You know, the ones in the restored Bradley building. I believe the penthouse just became available. The Bradley building, where Nathan had tried to buy an office suite last year but had been outbid by a mysterious buyer. That buyer, I now realized, had been Robert's investment group. That's very generous, I said. Nonsense. It's what you deserve. Email me tomorrow and we'll arrange the paperwork. And Margaret? Merry Christmas. After ending the call, I stood in the snow for another minute, feeling the cold seep through my coat. Then I walked back inside, where the party was winding down. Victoria found me in the hallway, holding my car keys, not hers, mine. Oh, good. You're still here, she said. I've put fresh blankets in the Escalade and there's a portable heater in the back. The key code for the garage is 4827 if you need to use the bathroom during the night. Actually, I said, putting on my coat, I won't be needing the car. She blinked, confused. What do you mean? I mean, I'm going home. To my house. Where I have a bed. But she glanced toward the living room where Nathan was settling the Changs into their accommodations. You can't leave. What will people think? I imagine they'll think I'm a woman with enough self-respect not to sleep in a garage on Christmas Eve. Her face flushed. You're being dramatic? It's just one night. The car is perfectly comfortable. Then you sleep in it, I suggested. I'll take your room. Don't be ridiculous. Her voice dropped to a harsh whisper. You know we have guests. Important guests. More important than your mother? She had the grace to look momentarily ashamed before rallying. It's not about importance. It's about practical arrangements. The Changs need a proper guest room. They have children. And I have dignity, I said. Though you seem to have forgotten that. Mother, she caught herself. Margaret, please. Don't make a scene. I'm not making anything. I'm simply declining your generous offer of garage accommodation. Thank you for dinner. Please give my regards to Nathan and his family. I moved toward the door, but she caught my arm. If you leave now, don't expect an invitation next year. I looked at her, really looked at her. Beneath the perfect makeup and designer dress, I could still see traces of the little girl who used to climb into my lap for bedtime stories. But that child was buried deep, suffocated by years of striving for a life that would never quite accept her, no matter how hard she tried. Victoria, I said gently, when was the last time you actually wanted me here? She released my arm, her mouth opening and closing without sound. That's what I thought. Merry Christmas, sweetheart. The drive home was treacherous. The snow had turned to sleet, making the roads slick and dangerous. But I felt strangely calm, as if a weight I'd been carrying for years had finally lifted. My phone buzzed with text messages. Victoria, demanding I return. Nathan, warning me about disappointing. His business associates. Even Nathan's mother, scolding me for my selfishness. I ignored them all. My little house in Ballard looked especially welcoming when I pulled into the driveway. I'd left the porch light on, and through the window I could see my small Christmas tree twinkling in the corner. It wasn't much, certainly nothing compared to Victoria's 12-foot designer specimen. But it was mine, decorated with ornaments I'd collected over the years, each one holding a memory. Inside, I made myself a cup of tea and sat in my favorite chair, the one I'd reupholstered myself after finding it at an estate sale. The house was quiet, except for the hum of the heater and the occasional car passing on the street. No piano, music, no forced laughter, no subtle reminders of my inferior status. Just peace. My phone rang. Harold Kim's name appeared on the screen. We'd had tentative plans for Christmas Day, but I'd canceled them when Victoria's invitation arrived. Old habits. Margaret? His voice was warm, concerned. I'm sorry to call so late, but I drove by and saw your lights on. Is everything all right? Everything's fine, I said, and meant it. Why aren't you at your son's house? Change of plans. Turns out they decided to go skiing in Whistler instead. They invited me, but he trailed off. But mountains and skiing aren't really your thing, I finished, remembering our conversation from last week. Exactly. So I'm having a quiet evening at home, watching It's a Wonderful Life and eating entirely too much Chinese food. He paused. You're welcome to join me if you're free. 2 months ago, I would have declined, would have held on to the fantasy that Victoria might need me, might call and want her mother. But that woman was gone, replaced by someone who understood that real invitations came without conditions, without checking first to see if there was room, without relegating you to the garage when someone more important arrived. Actually, I said, that sounds perfect. Give me 20 minutes? Take your time. I'll save you some pot stickers. After hanging up, I sat for another moment in my chair, looking around my small, comfortable home. Tomorrow, I'd need to have a longer conversation with Victoria about boundaries and respect. Next week, I'd start my new position and begin building a professional life that reflected my actual worth. There would be difficulties ahead. Nathan wouldn't take kindly to his connection at the firm being compromised, and Victoria would see my actions as betrayal rather than self-preservation. But tonight, on Christmas Eve, while my daughter's guests settled into warm beds and she fretted about appearances, I chose something different. I chose to spend the evening with someone who valued my company, who would never dream of asking me to sleep in a car, who saw me as a whole person rather than an inconvenient obligation. I changed into comfortable clothes, packed a tin with the cookies I'd baked earlier, and grabbed a bottle of wine from the rack. As I locked my door behind me, my phone buzzed with another message from Victoria. This is exactly why we can't include you in things. You always make everything about yourself. I deleted the message without responding. She was wrong, of course. For 35 years, I'd made everything about her. The job at the firm, the relationship with Harold, the simple act of going home to my own bed. None of these were about her. They were about finally, at 65 years old, making something about myself. The roads had been salted while I was inside, making the drive to Harold's easier. His townhouse was modest, but welcoming, with a wreath on the door and electric candles in each window. He answered before I could knock, as if he'd been watching for me. "Merry Christmas, Margaret," he said, taking the cookies and wine. "I'm glad you came." "So am I," said, stepping into the warmth of his home. Behind him, I could see his living room, where Jimmy Stewart was just discovering what life would have been like without him. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent so many years trying to be indispensable to Victoria that I'd forgotten to build a life where I was simply appreciated. As Harold led me inside, chattering about the movie and the food and his plans for New Year's, I felt my phone buzz one last time. Without looking, I switched it to silent. Whatever crisis Victoria had manufactured, whatever guilt she wanted to deploy, it could wait. For once in my life, I was exactly where I wanted to be, with someone who was genuinely happy to see me. The snow continued to fall outside, blanketing Seattle in pristine white. Somewhere across town, my daughter was playing hostess to people who would forget her name by New Year's. Her husband was calculating the social capital gained from housing international business partners. His mother was probably instructing Sandra on the proper way to prepare breakfast for their guests. And Margaret Chen? She was eating pot stickers with a kind man who made her laugh, watching a movie about the value of every life, even the ordinary ones, especially the ordinary ones. It wasn't the Christmas I'd planned, but as Harold handed me a pair of chopsticks and asked about my favorite parts of the movie, I realized it might be exactly the Christmas I needed. January 2nd arrived with the kind of bitter cold that makes your bones ache. I stood outside the Bradley building, looking up at its restored Art Deco facade, and allowed myself a moment of satisfaction. 40 years ago, I'd walked past this building as a young paralegal, dreaming of someday working somewhere so prestigious. Now I wasn't just working here. I was living in the penthouse apartment Robert had arranged, with views of Elliott Bay and Mount Rainier on clear days. The lobby still smelled of fresh paint and possibility. My heels clicked against the marble floor with authority I'd never felt before. The security guard, a young man named Marcus who'd helped me move in 3 days earlier, grinned and waved me through. "Morning, Ms. Chen. Big day?" "The biggest," I admitted. The elevator whisked me to the 15th floor, where Kwan and Associates occupied the entire East Wing. The reception area was all glass and clean lines, a far cry from the cramped law offices, where I'd spent decades transcribing other people's victories and defeats. Patricia Kwan herself stood by the reception desk, her silver hair pulled back in an elegant chignon. "Margaret," she said warmly, extending her hand. "Welcome to the team. Ready to make some waves?" "I've been ready for 40 years, I said. She laughed, a rich sound that filled the space. "That's what Robert told me. Come, let me show you to your office." My office, not a cubicle, not a shared workspace, but an actual office with windows and a door that closed. The nameplate on the desk read, "Margaret Chen, Senior Paralegal and Case Manager." I ran my fingers over the letters, still not quite believing this was real. "The Montgomery files are already on your desk," Patricia said. "Preliminary hearing is Thursday. Think you can have the financial analysis ready by then?" "Absolutely." "Good. And Margaret?" "Nathan Morrison Black called this morning. 3 times, actually. Seemed quite agitated about our new hire. I told him our staffing decisions were none of his concern." Her smile was sharp. He didn't take it well. After Patricia left, I settled into my new chair and opened the Montgomery file. Within minutes, I understood why Nathan was panicked. His business partner, David Chang, the same Chang whose family had displaced me on Christmas Eve, was named in several questionable transactions. Money moved through offshore accounts, property titles transferred just before bankruptcy filings, a pattern of financial manipulation that would make any judge furious. My phone buzzed. Victoria. I'd been expecting this call since New Year's, day when she'd discovered I'd moved out of my Ballard house. I let it go to voicemail, then played the message. "Margaret, this is ridiculous. I just drove by your house and there's a sold sign out front. The neighbors said you moved. Where are you? And what's this about you working for the Kwans?" "Nathan is beside himself. Call me immediately." I deleted the message and returned to the files. By lunch, I'd identified 6 more hidden accounts and a shell company registered in the Caymans. By 3 o'clock, I'd traced money transfers that connected to 3 other divorces Patricia had handled. Nathan and his associates had been helping. Wealthy spouses hide assets for years, taking a cut for their services. Robert stopped by as I was preparing my report. "How's the first day?" "Illuminating," I said, gesturing to the papers spread across my desk. "Did you know about this when you offered me the position?" "I suspected. Patricia's been trying to prove it for years, but she needed someone with the right combination of skills and motivation." He perched on the edge of my desk, a familiarity that would have been inappropriate from anyone else. "Speaking of motivation, there's something else you should know. Your daughter and son-in-law have reservations at Canlis tonight, table for 6, the Changs and another couple." "How do you know that?" "My nephew works there. Apparently, Nathan made quite a fuss about getting that specific table, the one with the city views. Said it was crucial for some business proposal." I looked at the files on my desk, then at Robert. "What time?" 8 o'clock. "Perfect. That gives me time to finish this report and change clothes." Robert's eyebrows rose. "You're not thinking of having dinner at one of Seattle's finest restaurants? Why not? I believe I've earned it." At 7:30, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, adjusting the black dress I'd bought that afternoon. It was simple but expensive, the kind of quality that whispered rather than shouted. The salesperson had tried to talk me into something flashier, but I knew better. Tonight wasn't about competing with Victoria's crowd. It was about showing them that Margaret Chen had never needed their approval to have value. Harold had offered to accompany me, but I'd declined. This was something I needed to do alone. He'd understood, just as he'd understood when I'd explained about the job and the move and the walls I was finally ready to tear down. "Just promise you'll call me after," he'd said. "I want to hear everything." Canlis sat perched on Aurora Avenue like a jewel box, all mid-century modern elegance and stunning views. I'd driven past it countless times over the years, adding it to my mental list of someday places. Tonight, someday had arrived. The maitre d' raised an eyebrow when I gave my name. "Chen, party of one? I don't see a reservation. I'm hoping you might have something available. Perhaps at the bar?" He scanned his tablet, frowning. Then his expression shifted. "Actually, we just had a cancellation. Table 12 by the windows. Would that work?" Table 12 turned out to be perfect. Close. Enough to table 15 to see and be seen, but not so close as to seem deliberate. I ordered a glass of champagne and studied the menu, allowing myself to enjoy the weight of the leather folder, the soft lighting, the murmur of conversation that spoke of deals being made and relationships being celebrated. They arrived at 8. Precisely. Nathan leading the way with the confidence of someone who'd never been turned away from anything. Victoria followed, stunning in a red dress that caught the light. The Changs came next, then another couple I didn't recognize. They swept past without noticing me, too focused on their grand entrance to pay attention to a single diner at a corner table. I watched them get settled, watched Nathan make a production of ordering wine, watched Victoria touch his arm and laugh at something Mr. Chang said. They looked like an advertisement for success, beautiful and untouchable. Once, that would have hurt. Now I simply observed, the way I'd learned to observe during depositions, noting dynamics and power plays. My waiter appeared with the amuse-bouche. "Compliments of the chef," he said, setting down a delicate spoon holding what looked like edible art. "He understands you're a friend of the Kwans." "How lovely," I said, loud enough to carry. Victoria's head snapped up. Her eyes widened as she took in my presence, my dress, my comfortable command of a space she'd assumed was beyond my reach. She half rose from her chair, then caught herself, trapped by the social protocols she valued so highly. One didn't make scenes at Canlis. I raised my champagne glass in her direction, a small acknowledgement, then returned to my meal. The first course arrived, Dungeness crab with citrus and avocado. I ate slowly, savoring each bite, letting my presence settle over their table like fog. Nathan noticed me during the second course. I saw him lean over to whisper urgently to Victoria, saw her shake her head slightly, warning him against action. The Changs remained oblivious, focused on whatever proposal Nathan was pitching, but the other couple kept glancing my way, clearly sensing the tension. By the time my entree arrived, perfectly seared scallops with cauliflower puree, their table had gone quiet. Victoria excused herself, and I knew she was heading my way before she'd taken 3 steps. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, standing close enough that other diners wouldn't hear. "Having dinner," I said, cutting into a scallop. "This is a public restaurant, Victoria, not a private club. You know what I mean. This is harassment. Following us here, trying to embarrass Nathan in front of his clients. Is that what you think this is?" I set down my fork and looked up at her. "That I arranged my life around your dinner plans? How very like you to assume you're always the main character." Her face flushed. "Then why are you here?" "Because I can be. Because I've spent 40 years believing I didn't belong in places like this, and I've finally realized that was never true. The only person who made me feel like I didn't belong was you. That's not—" She stopped, glancing back at her table where Nathan was watching with barely concealed fury. "We need to talk about your new job. Nathan says you're trying to destroy his business." "I'm doing my job. If that threatens Nathan's business, perhaps he should examine his business practices." "You don't understand what you're getting into. The Changs are important people. This deal tonight could change everything for us." "For you," I corrected. "It could change everything for you. My life has already changed, Victoria. I have a job that values my skills, an apartment with a view, and dinner reservations at restaurants I actually want to visit. What I don't have is a daughter who respects me, but I'm learning to live with that." Tears gathered in her eyes, and for a moment, I saw my little girl again, the one who used to cry when she couldn't solve a math problem or when the other kids excluded her at recess. But then she blinked, and the tears were gone, replaced by something harder. "If you ruin this for Nathan, I'll never forgive you." "You haven't forgiven me for being born poor," I said quietly. "What's one more unforgivable sin?" She returned to her table without another word. I finished my meal in peace, each bite a small celebration of having arrived somewhere on my own terms. When the check came, I paid without flinching at the number, then left a generous tip. Money I'd earned through my own expertise, not scraped together from overtime shifts. As I passed their table on my way out, Mr. Chang looked up and recognition flickered across his face. He'd seen me on Christmas Eve, serving food in Victoria's kitchen, and now here I was, dining alone at Canlis with the confidence of someone who belonged. I saw him lean over to whisper to his wife, saw her eyes widen as she made the connection. Nathan's carefully crafted image of success had just developed a crack. The next morning arrived with a series of increasingly frantic messages. Nathan threatening legal action, Victoria begging me to reconsider. Even Nathan's mother, demanding to know what kind of mother would sabotage her own daughter's happiness. I archived them all and focused on preparing for the Montgomery hearing. Thursday's proceedings were brutal. Patricia presented my findings. With surgical precision, each hidden account and shell company adding another nail to Mr. Montgomery's coffin. When Nathan's name came up in connection with the offshore transfers, Judge Martinez's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Morrison Black has been advising Mr. Montgomery?" she asked. "It appears so, Your Honor," Patricia replied. "We have emails and bank records showing his involvement in structuring these transactions." "I see. Please make sure copies of all relevant documents are forwarded to the State Bar. They'll want to investigate whether any ethical boundaries were crossed." In the gallery, I saw Nathan's face drain of color. An ethics investigation could destroy his ability to work with the family firm. Everything he'd built his identity around was crumbling because he'd chosen to help wealthy men cheat their wives out of fair settlements. After the hearing, Patricia found me in the hallway. "Excellent work, Margaret. I don't think I've ever seen financial manipulation laid out so clearly. I had good teachers, I said. 40 years of watching other people's lives fall apart taught me what to look for. Well, your expertise is going to be very valuable. I have 6 more cases that could use your attention, all involving similar financial shenanigans. She paused. Including one that might interest you particularly. The Changs are filing for divorce. Apparently, Mrs. Chang discovered her husband had been hiding assets for years. She wants to hire us. The irony was delicious. The same people who'd displaced me from my daughter's home would now be paying for my expertise in untangling their finances. I thought about refusing, about the conflict of interest, but then I remembered Christmas Eve. Remembered standing in the snow while they enjoyed the warmth I'd been denied. I'll take it, I said. That afternoon, Harold met me for coffee at the little shop near the courthouse. He listened as I recounted the morning's events, his eyes crinkling with what might have been admiration or concern. "You're not worried about burning bridges with Victoria?" he asked. "The bridge was already ash," I said. "I just finally stopped pretending it could carry weight." He reached across the table and took my hand. "For what it's worth, I think you're incredibly brave. Most people would have just accepted the car keys and the blanket." "Most people haven't spent 40 years building up resentment," I admitted. "This isn't really about revenge, though. It's about finally saying enough. Enough disrespect. Enough being treated as less than. Enough apologizing for who I am." "And who are you?" he asked gently. I thought about it. Really thought about the question I'd never had time to consider when I was too busy surviving and sacrificing. "I'm Margaret Chen, senior paralegal, apartment owner, woman who eats alone at fancy restaurants without shame, mother who loves her daughter but won't be diminished by her anymore." "I like that woman," Harold said. "So do I replied, and meant it. 2 weeks later, Robert called me into his office. The state bar had opened a formal investigation into Nathan's activities. 3 more clients had come forward with stories of hidden assets and financial manipulation. The Morrison Black name, once synonymous with prestige, was becoming toxic in legal circles. "He's asked for a meeting," Robert said. "Nathan wants to discuss a mutually beneficial arrangement." "Let me guess, he'll stop fighting the investigation if I quit?" "Something like that. He seems to think you're doing this out of spite." I laughed, surprising us both. "Of course he does. People like Nathan can't imagine doing anything that doesn't center around them. The truth is, I took this job because I was finally ready to be valued for my skills. The fact that it's causing him problems? That's just karma having a sense of humor." "So, should I tell him no meeting?" "Actually," I said, an idea forming, "set it up. But here, on our territory. And make sure Patricia is there." The meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday. I dressed carefully, choosing a suit that projected authority without trying too hard. When Nathan arrived, flanked by 2 lawyers who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else, I was all ready, seated at the conference table with Patricia and Robert. "Thank you for coming," Patricia said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "You indicated you had a proposal?" Nathan looked older than his 36 years. The past 2 weeks had carved lines around his eyes and mouth. His usual confidence had been replaced by something desperate and calculating. "This is all a misunderstanding," he began. "Margaret, Mrs. Chen, has taken some family conflicts and blown them out of proportion." "Financial fraud isn't a family conflict," Patricia said coolly. "It's a crime." "Alleged fraud," one of his lawyers corrected. "Well-documented alleged fraud," I said, speaking for the first time. "With bank records, emails, and a clear pattern across multiple cases." Nathan turned to me, and I saw something shift in his expression. For the first time since I'd met him 20 years ago, he was looking at me as an equal, someone with power, someone who could hurt him. "What do you want?" he asked directly. "From you?" "Nothing. I'm doing my job, Nathan. A job I'm very good at, as it turns out. Your involvement in these cases is simply a fact to be documented and reported. This will ruin me. Your choices will ruin you, I corrected. I'm just shining a light on them. He leaned forward, desperation making him reckless. Victoria is devastated. She cries every night. Is that what you want? To destroy your own daughter's marriage? You destroyed her marriage when you decided the rules didn't apply to you, I said evenly. When you chose to help wealthy men hide money from their families. When you treated financial manipulation as a game to be won, rather than lives being destroyed. We could make a deal, he said, ignoring his lawyer's attempts to silence him. I have information about other firms, other lawyers doing the same thing. I could be valuable to your investigation. Patricia and Robert exchanged glances. This was unexpected. We're listening, Patricia said. What followed was 2 hours of Nathan desperately trying to save himself by throwing everyone else under the bus. Names, dates, amounts, all spilling out as he attempted to position himself as a whistleblower rather than a perpetrator. His lawyers took notes frantically, trying to keep up with their client's confession. When it was over, when Nathan had implicated half the financial advisors in Seattle's elite circles, Patricia stood. We'll review this information and be in touch. Your cooperation will be noted, though I can't promise it will result in immunity. Nathan stood to leave, then paused at the door. She still loves you, you know. Victoria. She just doesn't know how to show it without feeling like she's betraying everything we've built. What you built was constructed on a foundation of other people's misery, I said, including mine. If it falls apart, maybe she'll have a chance to build something real. He left without another word. That evening, I found Victoria waiting in my apartment lobby. Marcus had called to warn me, so I wasn't surprised, but I was struck by how diminished she looked. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by jeans and a sweater I recognized from college. Her face was bare of makeup, revealing exhaustion and, "Pinto, how did you know where I lived?" I asked. "I followed you one day," she admitted. "I needed to see where you'd gone." I considered sending her away, but something in her posture, the way she held herself like she might shatter, made me relent. "Come up. We can talk." The elevator ride was silent. When we entered my apartment, with its soaring ceilings and water, "Views," she gasped. "This is beautiful." "Thank you. Would you like tea?" She nodded, following me to the kitchen like a lost child. While I prepared our drinks, she studied the photos I'd arranged on a bookshelf. Pictures of her as a baby, a toddler, a grinning kindergartner missing her front teeth. Photos from before she learned to be ashamed of me. "I remember this one," she said softly, touching a frame that showed us at her high school graduation. "You were so proud." "I still am," I said, handing her a mug. "Proud of the girl you were, anyway. I'm less certain about the woman you've become." She flinched but didn't protest. We sat on the couch, the lights of Seattle spreading below us like scattered diamonds. "Nathan's leaving me," she said finally. "He says I'm a liability now, that my connection to you has made him toxic to his clients." "I'm sorry you're hurting," I said, meaning it. "Are you sorry for causing it?" I considered the question. "No, I'm sorry Nathan chose to involve himself in fraud. I'm sorry you chose status over family. I'm sorry it took destroying your life for you to sit in my living room and actually see me, but I'm not sorry for finally claiming my worth." She started crying then, ugly sobs that shook her entire body. "I don't know who I am without him, without that life. I gave up everything to fit into his world." "I know the feeling," I said. "I gave up everything to make your world possible. The difference is, you chose your sacrifice. I made mine out of love." "Did you ever regret it? Having me?" "Never. Not once. I regretted plenty of other things, staying too long at jobs that underpaid me, accepting crumbs of affection, letting you treat me as an embarrassment. But you? You were never a regret. We sat in silence as her tears slowed. Finally, she asked, "What do I do now?" "You start over," I said simply. "You figure out who Victoria is when she's not trying to be Mrs. Morrison Black. You get a job that values your actual skills, not your connections. You learn to stand on your own feet. Like you did." I finally did, yes, at 65. You have the advantage of starting at 35. She looked around my apartment again, taking in the art I'd chosen, the books on my shelves, the life I'd built in just a few weeks of freedom. Would you consider— "No," I said gently. "You can't move in here. This is my space, my fresh start. You need to find your own." "I have nowhere to go. The house is Nathan's, the cars, everything. You have your education, your skills, your health. That's more than I had when your father died." I set down my mug and looked at her directly. "And unlike me, you don't have a small child depending on you. You only have yourself to worry about. Do you know what a luxury that is?" She wiped her eyes. "I guess I never thought about it that way." "No, you never thought about it at all." We talked for another hour, carefully, like two people navigating a minefield. I gave her the name of a lawyer friend who could help with the divorce, suggested some companies that might value her marketing degree. But when she left, we both understood that our relationship had fundamentally changed. The parent-child dynamic was gone, replaced by something more tentative. Two adults who might, someday, find a way to know each other. 6 months later, I sat in Judge Martinez's courtroom as she delivered her verdict in the Montgomery case. Complete financial disclosure, equal division of assets, and sanctions against Mr. Montgomery for attempted fraud. In the gallery, 3 other ex-wives watched with satisfaction, their own cases strengthened by the precedent being set. Nathan's name appeared in the court records, his involvement documented for anyone to see. The Morrison Black firm had quietly severed ties with him, protecting their reputation at his expense. Last I'd heard, he was working at a small financial consulting firm in Tacoma, his dreams of corporate power thoroughly crushed. Mrs. Chang had hired our firm the day after my confrontation with Nathan at Canlease. Her divorce had been swift and profitable, aided by my discovery of accounts her husband had hidden for decades. She'd sent me a thank you card with a check inside, a bonus for my excellent work. I'd donated it to a shelter for women escaping financial abuse. Victoria and I met for coffee once a month now, neutral territory, careful conversations. She'd found a job at a nonprofit, helping women re-enter the workforce after career breaks. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. She lived in a studio, apartment in Fremont, rode the bus to work, and was slowly learning who she was without Nathan's influence. "I'm seeing someone," she told me during our latest meeting. "James. He's a teacher at the community college. Makes me laugh." "That's good," I said. "Laughter is important." "He wants to meet you." I raised an eyebrow. "And how does that make you feel?" She fidgeted with her coffee cup. "Nervous. But not for the reasons you think. I'm not worried about what he'll think of you. I'm worried about what you'll think of him." "Why?" "Because your opinion matters to me now in a way it didn't before. Because I've learned that you see things clearly, even when it's painful. Because I want someone in my life who would give me blankets and car keys without seeing it as an acceptable solution. Progress. Slow, sometimes painful, but progress nonetheless. Harold and I were planning a trip to Hawaii for Christmas. He'd suggested it casually one evening, and I'd said yes without hesitation. No checking whether Victoria might need me. No holding dates in case something better came along. Just yes, Hawaii sounds perfect. Patricia had promoted me to Chief Financial Investigator, a title that came with a substantial raise and an even better office. I'd published 2 articles, in legal journals about financial manipulation in divorce proceedings. Law schools had started inviting me to speak to their family law classes. At 65, I'd finally found my professional stride. But the real transformation wasn't in my job or my apartment or my relationship with Harold. It was in the way I moved through the world, no longer apologizing for taking up space, no longer accepting less than I deserved, no longer sleeping in cars, literal or metaphorical, to make other people comfortable. The morning of our Hawaii flight, Victoria called. "I wanted to wish you a Merry Christmas," she said, "and to thank you." For what? For making that phone call, for refusing the car keys, for choosing yourself. It destroyed the life I thought I wanted, but it gave me the chance to build something real. "You're welcome," I said simply. "Mom?" The word hung between us, fragile and precious. "I love you." "I love you too, Victoria. I always have." After we hung up, I finished packing, adding the sundress I'd bought specifically for Christmas. Dinner on the beach. Harold would pick me up in an hour, and we'd fly toward sunshine and possibility. But first, I stood at my window, looking out at the city where I'd rebuilt myself, and felt profound gratitude. Not for the pain that had preceded this moment, but for the strength I'd found to transform it, for the courage to make one phone call that changed everything, for the wisdom to understand that love without respect isn't love at all. It's obligation, dressed in pretty clothes. The car keys Victoria had pressed into my hand last Christmas still sat in my jewelry box, a reminder of how far we'd both come. She'd meant them as a solution to an inconvenience. Instead, they'd become the key to my liberation. Sometimes the gifts we don't want are exactly what we need. My phone buzzed with a text from Harold. "On my way. Can't wait for our adventure." I smiled, gathering my luggage. Adventure indeed. At 65, I was just getting started. 5 years. That's how long it had been since I'd pressed those car keys back into Victoria's hand and walked out of her house on Christmas Eve. 5 years since one phone call changed the trajectory of not just my life, but the lives of everyone in my orbit. As I stood in my office at Quan & Associates, now occupying the corner suite with views of both the Sound and the mountains, I could hardly recognize the woman who had once accepted sleeping in cars as reasonable. The morning sun caught the Crystal Award on my desk, Washington State Bar Association's Excellence in Legal Investigation. It sat next to a photo from my wedding to Harold 3 years ago, a small ceremony on the beach in Maui with just 20 guests. Victoria had been my maid of honor, wearing a simple sundress and a genuine smile, no longer concerned with appearances or what anyone might think. "Margaret," Patricia knocked on my doorframe. "The Chen family is here for their consultation." The irony wasn't lost on me. David and Emily Chang, the same couple who had displaced me that Christmas Eve, now sat in my waiting room, their own marriage imploding over hidden assets and secret debts. After their divorce 5 years ago, David had remarried quickly, choosing another young woman impressed by his wealth. Now that wealth was evaporating, and Emily Chang, wife number 2, wanted to ensure she got her fair share before it disappeared entirely. "Send them in," I said, straightening the files on my desk. David Chang looked older, grayer, with the hollow eyes of someone watching their empire crumble. His wife was young, perhaps 28, with the same hungry look I'd once seen in Victoria's eyes, that desperate need to belong to a world that would never fully accept her. They sat across from me, and I watched recognition dawn on David's face. "You're Victoria's mother," he said slowly. "From that Christmas." "Yes," I said simply. "I'm also the chief financial investigator for this firm. My job is to ensure complete financial disclosure during divorce proceedings. Shall we begin?" His face flushed. "This is a conflict of interest. You can't—" "Actually, I can," I interrupted smoothly. "I have no financial stake in your divorce, no personal relationship with either party, and my previous social interaction with you was minimal. However, if you'd prefer to work with another firm, you're welcome to do so. Though I should mention, we're the only firm in Seattle with a perfect record in uncovering hidden assets. Emily Chang leaned forward. We're staying, she said firmly, shooting her husband a look that could freeze water. I want the best. 3 hours later, after documenting what appeared to be a complex web of cryptocurrency investments and offshore holdings, I watched them leave my office. David had tried several times to charm me, to find some common ground that might make me sympathetic to his position. Each time, I'd simply return to the numbers, the facts, the paper trail he'd thought was invisible. You enjoy that, don't you? Patricia observed, appearing in my doorway as the elevator doors closed on the Changs. The poetic justice of it all. I enjoy doing my job well, I corrected. If that job happens to involve people who once thought I was beneath them, well, I shrugged. Patricia laughed. Speaking of poetic justice, did you see the news about Nathan Morrison Black? I had. Nathan's attempts to rebuild his career had been systematically thwarted by his own reputation. The financial consulting firm in Tacoma had let him go when clients started asking too many questions. His last attempt at redemption, starting his own advisory service, had failed when the State Bar published their final report on his involvement in the asset-hiding scheme. Last week, the Seattle Times had run a feature on financial fraud in divorce proceedings, using Nathan as their primary cautionary tale. Victoria mentioned he's moving to Montana, I said. Apparently his uncle owns a ranch there. He's going to help manage it. From financial advisor to cattle rancher, Patricia mused. That's quite a fall. Or a chance to start over, I suggested. Sometimes losing everything is the only way to find out who you really are. Patricia studied me. You've forgiven him. I've released him, I corrected. There's a difference. Forgiveness suggests I'm absolving him of wrongdoing. I'm simply choosing not to carry the weight of his choices anymore. My phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. Lunch still on? I have news. We met at our usual spot, a small Vietnamese restaurant halfway between her office and mine. She was already there when I arrived, practically vibrating with excitement. The nonprofit where she worked had just promoted her to Director of Client Services, overseeing their entire women's reentry program. It comes with a real salary, she said, beaming. Enough to finally get a one-bedroom instead of a studio. And benefits. Actual health insurance that doesn't require me to choose between doctor visits and groceries. I'm so proud of you, I said, meaning it. You've worked hard for this. I learned from the best, she said, then caught herself. I learned what hard work actually looks like by watching you, even if I didn't appreciate it at the time. We ordered our usual, pho for her, vermicelli bowl for me, and settled into the comfortable rhythm we'd developed over the years. No longer mother and daughter in the traditional sense, but two women who'd found their way back to each other through pain and growth. There's something else, Victoria said, fidgeting with her chopsticks. James proposed last night. I set down my spring roll. And I said I needed to think about it. She met my eyes. I love him. He's kind and funny, and he sees me for who I am, not who he wants me to be. But I'm terrified of making the same mistakes. The fact that you're questioning it shows growth, I offered. What does your gut tell you? That he's nothing like Nathan. That when he says he loves me, he means me. Victoria Chen, who takes the bus and shops at thrift stores and sometimes cries during insurance commercials. Not some idealized version he's created in his head. Then what's holding you back? She was quiet for a moment. I'm afraid of losing myself again. Of waking up in 10 years and realizing I've become someone I don't recognize. Do you know what the difference is between who you were with Nathan and who you are now? I asked. What? Now you know who you are. You've done the work to figure that out. You can't lose something you're actively choosing to maintain. Her eyes filled with tears. When did you get so wise? Sometime between sleeping in cars and running financial investigations for the state's top family law firm, I said dryly. Wisdom, it turns out, is just pain transformed into useful knowledge. That evening, Harold and I attended the opera, something we'd started doing monthly after discovering our mutual love for dramatic music and elaborate staging. As we sat in the mezzanine, his hand holding mine, I thought about how different my life looked now. Not just the obvious changes, the apartment, the job, the financial security, but the internal ones. The way I moved through the world without apology. The way I accepted good things without feeling I needed to earn them through suffering. During intermission, we encountered Judge Martinez and her husband. She greeted me warmly, praising the work I'd done on a recent case involving a tech executive who'd tried to hide stock options through a maze of shell companies. You have a gift, she said. The way you can look at numbers and see the story. They're telling. It's invaluable in these cases. After she moved on, Harold squeezed my hand. You know what I love most about these 5 years? He asked. What's that? Watching you realize what everyone else already knew, that you're extraordinary. The second act began before I could respond, but I carried his words with me through the soaring arias and dramatic crescendos. Extraordinary. Not for sleeping in cars or sacrificing everything for an ungrateful child, but for finally choosing to see my own worth and demanding others see it too. A week later, I was preparing for a speaking engagement at the University of Washington's law school when my assistant knocked. Margaret, there's someone here to see you. Says she's your former neighbor. I looked up to find Ellen Patterson, the elderly woman who had watched Victoria all those nights when I was in school. She was frailer now, walking with a cane, but her eyes were still bright with intelligence and kindness. Mrs. Patterson, I said, rushing to help her to a chair. What a wonderful surprise. I saw your picture in the paper, she said, settling. Carefully. That article about financial investigations. I couldn't believe it was little Margaret Chen, all grown up and successful. Thanks to you, I said. I couldn't have gotten my certification without your help watching Victoria. She waved dismissively. You'd have found a way. You always were resourceful. But that's not why I'm here. She pulled an envelope from her purse. I'm moving to an assisted living facility next month. My children think it's time, and they're probably right. But I wanted to give you this first. Inside the envelope was a photograph I'd never seen. Victoria at age 5, asleep on Mrs. Patterson's couch, clutching the stuffed rabbit I'd saved for weeks to buy. In the background, barely visible, was my younger self, books spread on the kitchen table, hand cramped around a pencil. I took that one night when you were studying, Mrs. Patterson explained. You looked so tired but so determined. I thought someday you might want to remember how hard you worked for everything you achieved. I stared at the photo, seeing not exhaustion but dedication. Not poverty, but purpose. That young woman bent over her books had no idea that 40 years later, she'd be running financial investigations that would change state law. She couldn't imagine refusing to sleep in a car would lead to exposing corruption among Seattle's elite. She just knew she had to keep going, keep fighting, keep believing that somehow it would be worth it. Thank you, I said, voice thick with emotion. This means more than you know. Mrs. Patterson patted my hand. You turned out exactly as I expected, strong, successful, and kind. Though I do wonder what happened with Victoria, such an intense little girl. She's finding her way, I said. It took some detours, but she's becoming the person she was meant to be. Aren't we all? Mrs. Patterson said wisely. After she left, I placed the photograph on my desk next to the others. Past and present side by side, showing the journey. From that exhausted young mother to the woman I'd become. Both versions of me deserving of respect, both valuable, both extraordinary in their own ways. The speaking engagement that evening went better than expected. The law students listened intently as I explained how financial manipulation worked in divorce proceedings, how to spot hidden assets, how to protect vulnerable spouses from economic abuse. During the Q&A, a young woman raised her hand. "How do you handle the emotional aspect?" she asked. "When you're uncovering betrayals and lies that destroy families?" I thought about David Chang's face that morning, about Nathan's fall from grace, about Victoria's tears in my apartment 5 years ago. You remember that behind every hidden asset is a person being cheated. Behind every offshore account is someone who trusted their partner and was betrayed. My job isn't to destroy families. They're already broken by the time they come to me. My job is to ensure fairness, to prevent further victimization. But doesn't it affect you personally? Of course it does. But I've learned to channel that emotion into fuel for doing better work. Every case where I uncover hidden millions is a victory for someone who might otherwise have been left with nothing. Every investigation that reveals financial manipulation is justice for someone who's been gaslit into believing they're worthless. The young woman nodded thoughtfully. Later, as the session ended, she approached me. "I'm a single mom," she said quietly. "Working 2 jobs to get through law school. Sometimes I wonder if I'm crazy, if I should just give up." I looked at her, young, tired, determined, and saw myself 40 years ago. "What's your name?" "Maria Gonzalez." "Maria, can I tell you something? The struggle you're going through right now, it's not a detour from your path, it is your path. Every night you stay up studying after your child is asleep, every sacrifice you make, every time you choose to keep going when quitting would be easier. That's building the strength and perspective that will make you exceptional." "You really think so?" "I know so, because 40 years ago I was you. And now I'm here, teaching law students about financial investigations, married to a wonderful man, with a daughter who finally sees me as a whole person. The journey isn't easy, but it's worth it." She left with tears in her eyes and hope in her smile. After the students dispersed, Professor Williams, who'd invited me to speak, shook his head in admiration. "You have a gift for connecting with them. Would you consider teaching a seminar next semester? We could work around your schedule at the firm." Teaching. Another door opening, another opportunity I never could have imagined when I was transcribing other people's victories. "I'd be honored," I said. The drive home took me through my old neighborhood in Ballard. I rarely went that way anymore, but tonight felt like an evening for remembering. The house where Victoria and I had lived for so many years had been renovated, painted a cheerful yellow with a new fence and landscaping. A young family lived there now. I'd seen the toys in the yard and the minivan in the driveway when I'd sold it. I pulled over for a moment, looking at the window that had been Victoria's room. How many nights had I checked on her there, adjusting her blankets, whispering promises that life would get better? How many mornings had I gotten ready for work in the dark, trying not to wake her, fueled by instant coffee and determination? My phone rang, pulling me from my reverie. It was Harold. "Where are you, love? Dinner's almost ready." "Just taking a small detour," I said. "I'll be home in 15 minutes. Home. Our condo in the Bradley building, with its view of the water and the mountains. Where Harold cooked elaborate meals just because he enjoyed it. Where we hosted dinner parties for friends who valued us for who we were. Where Victoria now came for Sunday dinners without checking first to see if we had other guests." As I drove away from my past toward my present, I thought about that Christmas Eve 5 years ago. How humiliated I'd felt being handed those car keys. How my dignity had finally overcome my desperation. How one phone call to Robert Kwan had set everything in motion. Not just the job and the financial security, but the complete reconstruction of my life. Victoria had called me recently, laughing about something. "Mom," she'd said, "remember when you told me you wouldn't sleep in the car?" James asked why that was such a big deal, and I realized I couldn't explain it without sounding like a complete monster. "Well, honey, I asked my 65-year-old mother to sleep in our garage on Christmas Eve because we had important guests." He was horrified. "What did you tell him?" I'd asked. The truth. That I'd lost sight of basic human decency in my pursuit of a life that was never going to accept me. That you refusing those car keys was the wake-up call I desperately needed. That if you'd accepted them, I might still be married to Nathan. Still chasing approval from people who saw me as disposable. Now pulling into our building's garage. Indoor, heated, with an elevator directly to our floor. I marveled at how that moment of standing up for myself had rippled outward, affecting so many lives. Nathan, exiled to Montana. The Changs, divorced, and financially exposed. The dozens of spouses who'd received fair settlements because of my investigations. Victoria, rebuilt from the ground up into someone authentic and kind. Harold had made salmon with that maple glaze I loved, paired with a wine we'd discovered on our last trip to Napa. As we ate, he told me about his day. He'd been volunteering at the community center, teaching computer skills to seniors, and I shared the encounter with Mrs. Patterson and the invitation to teach. "Professor Chen," he said, raising his glass. "I like the sound of that." "It's just a seminar," I protested. "For now, but we both know you don't do anything halfway." He was right, of course. I'd already started thinking about curriculum, about case studies, about ways to help students understand the human element behind financial crimes. After dinner, as we sat on our balcony despite the chilly evening, Harold asked, "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you'd accepted those car keys?" I considered it. I'd probably still be working myself to death, still accepting crumbs of affection, still believing that love meant sacrificing everything while receiving nothing in return. Victoria would still be married to Nathan, still performing a role that was slowly killing her spirit. And you and I squeezed his hand. We might never have become more than acquaintances who nodded at each other in the hospital hallways. So really, those car keys were a gift. The worst gifts, sometimes, are, I agreed. They force us to finally see what we've been accepting as normal. My phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. "Said yes to James, but small wedding this time. Just family and real friends. Will you help me plan it?" I showed Harold the message, and he smiled. "Tell her we'd be honored. But no car sleeping arrangements for out-of-town guests." I laughed, typing back, "Congratulations, and don't worry, everyone gets a proper bed at this wedding." Her response came quickly. "I love you, Mom." 3 words that had become common. Between us now, no longer weighted with obligation or conditional on behavior. Just love, simple and clean. As the city lights sparkled below us, I thought about transformation. Not the dramatic overnight kind they show in movies, but the slow, sometimes painful process of becoming who you were always meant to be. It had taken 65 years, a health crisis, and the humiliation of being offered car keys instead of house keys. But I'd finally arrived at a life that fit. The next morning brought a new case, another wealthy spouse trying to hide assets, another puzzle to solve. But first, I had coffee with Maria Gonzalez, the law student from my talk. She'd emailed asking for advice, and I'd suggested meeting. Before her classes. "I've been thinking about what you said," she began, clutching her coffee cup. "About the struggle being the path. But some days I can barely keep my eyes open. My daughter asks why I'm always tired, always studying. I feel like I'm failing her." "How old is your daughter?" I asked. 7. "When she's 37, what do you hope she remembers about this time?" Maria thought. "That I worked hard? That I didn't give up?" "My daughter is 40 now," I said. And you know what she tells people about her childhood? Not that I was tired or busy or stressed. She says, "My mother showed me what determination looks like. She taught me that circumstances don't define your worth. Your daughter is watching you choose growth over comfort, education over ease. That's a gift, even if neither of you can see it yet." We talked for another hour, and when Maria left for class, she walked taller, with more purpose. Another ripple from that night 5 years ago, extending outward in ways I could never have predicted. The afternoon brought a meeting with Patricia and Robert. The firm was expanding again, opening a satellite office in Tacoma. They wanted me to oversee it, to build a team focused specifically on financial investigations in family law. "It's a big responsibility," Robert warned. "You'd be managing people, dealing with administrative duties on top of casework." "And teaching," I added. "Professor Williams wants me to do a seminar." Patricia laughed. "Of course he does. Well, we can work with your schedule. The question is whether you want this level of responsibility." 5 years ago, I would have said no immediately, would have believed I wasn't capable, wasn't worthy. Now I simply said, yes, I want it all. That evening, Victoria and James came for dinner. She was radiant, showing off her simple engagement ring, a vintage piece from his grandmother, nothing like the ostentatious diamond Nathan had given her. James was exactly as she'd described, kind, funny, completely unbothered by material status. He taught mathematics at a community college and coached basketball on weekends. "Mrs. Chen," he said over dessert, "Victoria told me about that Christmas Eve. I want you to know if you ever need anything, a place to stay, help with anything at all. We're here. Family takes care of each other. Please, call me Margaret," I said, "and thank you. That means a lot." "He can't get over it," Victoria said, rolling her eyes affectionately. "He keeps asking how anyone could treat their mother that way. I told him I wasn't really seeing you as my mother then. You were just this obligation I had to manage while maintaining my image." "And now?" Harold asked gently. "Now I see Margaret Chen, survivor, fighter, investigator, teacher, woman who eats at fancy restaurants whenever she wants." She grinned at me. "Who also happens to be my mother, which makes me incredibly lucky." Later, as we cleaned up, Victoria pulled me aside. "I need to ask you something. James and I are thinking of buying a house. Nothing fancy, just a small place near his school. But I'm terrified of making financial mistakes. Would you help us review everything? Make sure we're not getting in over our heads?" "Of course," I said. "We'll go through every document, every number. You'll understand exactly what you're signing." "That's what I want," she said firmly. "No more blind trust. No more letting other people control my financial future. I want to understand it all." Another ripple. Another life changed by the simple act of refusing to accept less than I deserved. As the evening wound down and our guests prepared to leave, James shook my hand warmly. "Thank you for raising the woman I love," he said simply. "I know it wasn't easy, but you did an amazing job." After they left, Harold and I stood at our window, looking out at the city lights reflected on the water. Tomorrow would bring new cases, new challenges, the start of building the Tacoma office. Next week, I'd begin preparing my law school seminar. Next month, Victoria and James would start their house hunt with my guidance. But tonight, I simply stood with the man who loved me, in the home I'd earned, living the life I'd built by refusing to sleep in a car. The woman who'd taken those car keys 5 years ago had thought she was preserving family peace. Instead, she'd been enabling dysfunction, teaching her daughter that some people matter less, accepting treatment that no one should endure. The woman who refused them had started a revolution, not just in her own life, but in the lives of everyone around her. Each boundary set, each moment of self-respect claimed, each recognition of her own worth had created ripples that were still spreading, still changing lives, still revealing truths that needed to be seen. "Penny for your thoughts," Harold said, wrapping an arm around me. "I was thinking about butterfly effects," I said. "How one small action can change everything. Like refusing to sleep in a car." "Exactly like that." I leaned into his warmth. "Best decision I ever made." "Second best," he corrected. "Saying yes when I asked you to dinner was the best?" I laughed, feeling the truth of it, because refusing those car keys had led to everything else: the job, the respect, the rebuilt relationship with Victoria, and yes, this man who saw my worth from the beginning. 5 years, 60 months. 1,825 days since I'd handed back those keys and walked away from a life that demanded I shrink myself to fit. Now I stood tall, expanded to fill all the space I deserved, surrounded by people who celebrated rather than merely tolerated my presence. The car keys still sat in my jewelry box, now framed in a small shadow box Harold had made. A reminder not of humiliation, but of transformation. Not of what I'd endured, but of what I'd overcome. Not of the night I was asked to sleep in a car, but of the moment I remembered I deserved a bed, a home, a life of dignity and respect. And that, more than any professional achievement or financial success, was the true victory. The recognition that Margaret Chen, mother, survivor, investigator, teacher, woman, human being, had always been enough, had always been extraordinary, had always deserved to sleep somewhere warm. It just took 65 years and one cold Christmas Eve for her to finally believe it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.